Hello and welcome. And in this video, we're going to look at 1845 to 1848, roughly. Going to look a bit, some stuff a little bit earlier, but essentially we're looking at westward expansion, Texas and the Mexican War, and how this impacts on the USA. And what this is essentially looking at is really the starting of tension between the North and the South. And westward expansion is one of the major issues that causes that tension. So things had been put in place before this time period. If we go back all the way to 1803, then America had bought a huge swathe of land from France, known as the Louisiana Purchase, for $15 million, which, as we'll see later in the video, seems to be the amount of money the USA pays when it's buying bits of land. Now, this is a gigantic bit of land. You can see in the map above me, I mean, it almost doubled the size of the USA at the time, and to start off with, it's left largely empty, and it's not 100% clear what's going to happen with all this land. And there had been a degree of resettlement of Native American tribes into it as well. Now, in 1820, there was debate over westward expansion, and this led to the Missouri Compromise. Now, Missouri entered the United States as a slave state. Maine entered the USA as a free state. And there was this agreement that the land left in the Missouri Compromise would be divided across the 3630 line. Anything below that line would become a slave state if it entered the Union. Anything above that line would enter as a free state. And there was this really delicate balancing act going on at the time, trying to keep the number of free states and slave states equal. And as long as they did that, the northern southern kind of tension seemed to be okay, because each state brought 2 senators, and what the North and the South wanted was to not be outnumbered in the Senate. Now, the South is always going to be outnumbered in the House of Congress, because the representation from the House of Congress depends on size of population, and the southern states had a smaller population. So they were reliant on keeping that balance in the Senate. Now, there were states being added after this point, Arkansas, Michigan, and these kind of highlighted that states could be brought in to the USA. There could be westward expansion without it causing huge amounts of tension. Now, that is going to change, however, when we get on to Texas and the Mexican War. So there is a compromise in place, but it only applies to the Louisiana Purchase. We have had free and slave states join in the first half of the 19th century, but this next stage is going to take things to a whole new level. Right, so Texas. Texas is got a really interesting history. Texas had been part of Mexico. It then essentially fought for its independence. It became an independent state under the leadership of Sam Houston in 1836, and for 9 years, essentially it stood alone as an independent state. That's why Texas is often referred to as the Lone Star State or One Star State. And this Lone Star State was almost like a little independent country. I say little, it's not little, really. I mean, if you took the UK, you could fit it into Texas 3 to 5 times. It's really, really big. So it's been an independent state. It joins the USA in 1845, but it joining causes some real problems. So first of all, Texas is huge, as I just mentioned, so it potentially can make up to 5 states. Now, Mexico had made slavery illegal, but a lot of the US settlers in Texas had taken their slaves with them. So would Texas be a slave state was a question that would be asked at the time. Now, ultimately, Texas enters as a single slave state, and this is a kind of compromise in itself. So the South would like it to enter as multiple slave states. The North would rather, or some in the North would rather it didn't join at all. No, but the idea of westward expansion was kind of a unifying force across America. So there wasn't strong enough resistance to stop Texas joining from the north, but there was this insistence that it was a single state, not multiple states, so it didn't throw the balance in the Senate too badly. Now, there was this idea at the time, which was referred to as manifest destiny. It comes from John O'Sullivan, and he wrote in a piece in 1845 that America had a manifest destiny, a kind of God-given right to take control of all the land from the Atlantic Ocean all the way across to the Pacific Ocean, and to settle that land. And this fitted with American ideals to do with the frontier spirit and taming the wilderness, and the need for kind of European settlement. And now O'Sullivan argued that essentially taking control of Texas was just the first step. And what America needed to do was to take control of more Mexican territory, probably most importantly, including California, which would give them access to the sea. And this was seen as a kind of a new territory that would offer a great deal to the USA. Now, his ideas had a real kind of racial element to them, because he was writing very explicitly about Anglo-Saxon settlement. And this kind of really suggests that the native populations, Native American populations, and Mexican population would be displaced to make way for this new growing country. Now, there's quite a lot of what O'Sullivan suggests, which actually all comes to pass, because he talks about then, even in 1845, about America rising in the next 100 years to have a population of over 250 million, which it now does. So this kind of idea of God being essentially on the American settlers' side, him pushing America to go westward and to take control of this new land, feeding into the kind of the frontier spirit, this idea of exploration, really was a popular one at the time. And we can see this because President Polk was elected in 1844, and the major part of his platform was about Western expansion. Now, there was a lot of tension caused by Polk coming to power. Mexico still claimed sovereignty over Texas, which had just been added to the United States, and Polk kind of prods and pokes at Mexico until he gets a response. So he sends troops into the disputed border area and into essentially what was Mexican territory, and he's hoping to get a reaction so he can justify a war. And he gets that in May 46. US troops on Mexican soil are ambushed. There's a number of men, 16 men, who are killed and wounded. Now, Polk claims that American blood had been shed on American soil. It's not really true. It's not clear cut this is American soil at all. And he asked Congress to declare war, which they did. And this is often referred to as Polk's War. Now, it would prove that the US Army was far too powerful for the Mexicans, and they took control of huge swathes of Mexico. Now, we see, for example, that in California, they've got this Western explorer called Fremont, who's going to become a really important political figure later on, and we'll see quite a bit more of him as we look at later parts of the course. So he took it upon himself to get the settlers in California to rise up and claim independence from Mexico. He was named their leader. They had a flag with a bear on it, a symbol of independence. And then about a month later, after he did this, the US Navy arrived, and we see the American flag raised. We've got Kearny occupying Santa Fe, which later become part of New Mexico, on the 18th of August 46, without a shot being fired. He raises the American flag, he garrisons Santa Fe, and he moves forward into California, where there's been a Mexican uprising against American control. Most of the fighting takes place in central Mexico, and in 47, General Taylor has defeated Sana's army in the Battle of Buena Vista. Mexico is still refusing to accept defeat. So under General Scott, the US troops march inland towards Mexico City, and they go on and occupy Mexico's capital. So the US is now in a position where essentially it could annex pretty much the whole of Mexico. But the opinions at home are really strongly divided, and this creates a real issue. Now, we see a couple of really contrasting and really incompatible views coming across. So the guy at the top of the screen is David Wilmot. Now, he and many others believed that this was a southern war. I mean, it was largely fought by southern troops, and Polk was trying to kind of seize this huge amount of land in the South, which he was going to turn into a huge number of slave states, shifting the balance of power in the Senate, and they could see that Polk, or in their mind, Polk was acting irresponsibly and had not been honest when he got elected, because he'd also said he was going to take this land in the north, in disputed area with Britain. And he agreed a border with Britain in terms of what was become the US-Canadian border over in the west. But the Northerners were going, well, he fought for land in the south, but he wouldn't fight for land in the north. Maybe slightly misreading the kind of impact this would have had, because fighting wars against Mexico would have been very different in terms of fighting a war against the British Empire at this moment in time. So Wilmot, who was a Democrat, same as Polk, then brings in this proviso in the House, and where he says that any land taken from Mexico in the war that was going on at the time should be excluded from having slavery. So go, right, fine, if you want westward expansion, we want westward expansion, that's okay, but we are not going to let you use this as a mechanism for expanding slavery. Now, this gained huge northern support, and rather than voting on party lines, people voted on sectional lines. It passed in the House, but it fell in the Senate. And again, showing the importance, as we talked about earlier, about having a balance of North and South in the Senate. Really furious at this, there was a strong reaction from Southern representatives and senators. And the most notable of this is Calhoun from South Carolina. And he launches his platform of the South in February '47. And he states on this that every slave owner has the right to take their property, which essentially then means their slaves, wherever they liked. And if Northerners were going to try and prevent this, then the South would have no option to secede. And so we see here from Calhoun a kind of a threat of what would actually ultimately lead to war in '61 in terms of secession. Not the first time Calhoun's threatened secession. He'd done it in a nullification crisis, and there'll be another video that looks not only at the Missouri Compromise in more detail, but looks at the nullification crisis as well. The treaty with Mexico is signed in '47, and in this treaty, land is taken from Mexico, but not as much land as the US could have taken, and the USA actually decides to pay Mexico for the privilege of having beaten them in a war and taken land off them. Again, the amount is $15 million, which just seems to be an amount that stuck in American minds when it came to taking land. Polk himself and many Southerners were very unhappy with this compromise, and although essentially the issue of how much land was taken from Mexico was settled, the issue over slavery and how that would be dealt with would not be dealt with until the 1850 compromise. So not everything is sorted. Right, 1850 compromise I look at in another video, and then we'll go on through into the 1850s. There'll also be another video looking at Missouri Compromise and the nullification crisis that I've mentioned in this video in more detail, but they're kind of a legacy of the past which is hung over America as we move into the real tension of the 1850s pushing into the 1860s. So thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like, to share, to subscribe, and again, look at the rest of the playlist on America. This is quite an extensive number of videos looking at American history through the mid-19th century. Hope this was helpful to you, and I'll speak to you all again soon. Thank you very much.